All right, everybody. Welcome to Unqork's Twitch channel and our first episode, Unqork 101. Now, some of you might be asking yourself, didn't you already do Unqork 101? Well, the answer is no. If any of this no code looks familiar, if any of these jokes sound equally as bad, go play the lotto because you just have great intuition. This is our first and our inaugural episode. So since it is our first time up here on Twitch, I just want to give you a brief introduction to myself. My name is Nick Gamble. I'm going to be your primary host throughout the Unqork Twitch channel. You will get sick of me at some point, so we'll definitely rotate in some other folks, but you're still going to see a lot of me. And that's because I've been a software engineer, a software developer, at least in software development, my whole career. Started as a heads down developer, those good old days where you just pop some headphones in and rock out to some code all day, all the way up to leading larger teams and platforms and technology organizations. And then I joined Unqork about 3 years ago when we were 25 people, not the 700 person organization we are today. And admittedly, as many folks are, as many developers are, as a lot of people in the technology space might be, skeptical about no code. And I won't lie to you. But here I am 3 years later, sitting in front of you without an ounce of skepticism in me and having not written a line of code in 3 years. And now we're really excited to get out to the developer audience more, have folks like myself who have, that developer background talking to you and really, really connecting with you and showing you that, no code does not mean no developers. No code doesn't mean the end of a developer's life. No code is a really powerful way and a really great evolution in software development and how much it can mean to you in your day-to-day as a developer, make maybe even a better developer than you already are. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, how can I be any better of a developer? Well, I promise you, no code can do that for you. So once again, this is going to be Unqork 101. So we're going to cover the basics today. Just walk you through a basic demo of what an end-to-end application looks like in Unqork. But it's going to get a lot more exciting and a lot more technical and a lot more complex as we continue to do these sessions. Now, we're going to talk to you in future sessions about API gateways, about asynchronous processing, microservices. Heck, we were going to show you how to build a video game with artificial intelligence in Unqork. I don't know, if you ask me, that sounds pretty cool. But like I said, today is the 101 session. So let's go and let's dive into Unqork. All right. The first thing you're going to see here, this is the landing page of Designer, which is where you're going to do majority of your development, if not all your development within Unqork. Okay, and it's going to be broken down into three primary levels of hierarchy. You got your workspaces, which is what you're looking at now. We're going to show you the applications that are within inside your workspaces, and then we're going to get into workflows and modules, which are individual pieces. Now think about code. Think about maybe your Bitbucket setup with work or your GitHub setup at work. Oftentimes there's a workspace, right, or a group of your repositories together. That could be a team of folks who are working on a bunch of similar projects, or it could just be one very large application that's broken up to bigger pieces. No difference here in terms of a workspace. All right, when we drive down into a workspace and get into an application, think about an application like a repo, a repository of your code. It could be a microservice, it could be a full-blown application, but it is some grouping of, not necessarily files of code, but workflows and modules, as I said, that work together to create and deliver some functionality. Okay, and then we're going to get back down into the modules and the workflows, the very little basic, again, your files in your repo and things like that. So let's jump into my workspace. Workspace is espace du travail de Nick. What that means is Nick's workspace, basically. In fact, it probably should be l'espace du travail de Nick. Mais ça va. My French is a little bit rusty these days, but bear with me regardless. Now you see that we're in my workspace. You see all of my applications. There is an application called Halo over here that your eyes might be drawn to. I know that Twitch is primarily a video game streaming platform, so I did want to make this demo as video game centric as possible, and I am playing a lot of Halo Infinite these days, but wasn't able to make it happen. Couldn't really get a 101 content of something as cool as Halo, but stay tuned. I will make it happen for you. But instead today, we're going to jump into this application called The Show, which is all about still games, but baseball. Baseball is a game, right? So now that we're in our application, I'm going to show you the main pieces of it. So first and foremost, we have a workflow, okay? Then we have your modules, which are pieces of that workflow. And then we have data collections, which is, think of it like an Excel table where you can look up static data. Not something we're going to show today, but is one of the core pieces of an application. And so we're going to dive, though, into the workflow. Okay, so I'm going to open up my workflow. And you're going to get this wonderful diagram. If you're familiar with BPMN, it's going to look a lot like a BPMN diagram. Okay, and within it is going to be screens. There are going to be decisions and gateways, and there are going to be swim lanes. All right. So what are swim lanes? Swim lanes are, effectively where different roles and different people can interface with different aspects or different steps within your workflow. So here we have an authenticated lane. So this is if you're logged into our system, you're going to interact with these pages on the screen. And then down here we have an automated lane. This is a pretty cool lane, right? Because this is where you can actually run stuff on the server. So APIs effectively as steps within your workflow. Okay, let's just go ahead and let's preview this workflow. Now I pull it up and we've got our first step here. Now in this workflow, we're basically going to take some information about a baseball player. We're going to ask them for some statistics, and then we're going to just do some calculations and basically figure out how good they are of a baseball player. Okay, now out of the box, this is going to be fully responsive. Now, some of you might be saying, of course it is. I think responsive design is something developers have come to expect and end users have come to expect, but you don't have to worry about that with Unqork. You don't need to choose between Bootstrap, Material, or any other of the UI frameworks out there. You're just going to get that out of the box with Unqork, and you can add your pizzazz on top of that. All right, so this is what the front end looks like. Why don't we just jump in and let's see what the back end of this page looks like. So I'm going to open up this task of our workflow, which is our module, which is our player info module, which again is what you're seeing over here. Okay, we've got 5 basic form elements because most of the web is made up of form elements, particularly if you're capturing data, right? You need those standard inputs to do so. So Unqork over on the left here has a number of those standard UI components built for you to collect data from an end user and in a way that you don't have to write that code, of course. So we got text fields, text areas, checkboxes, all again your primary types of input components. You've got a secondary set, so a little more granular in terms of what you'd want, but broken down by types, right? So emails, phone numbers, validation built into these types of components that you can just drag onto the screen. We have display and layout components, so to help you either just drop in little snippets of HTML, ways that you can organize things in columns and group items to create a very cohesive and a very usable user interface for your end users. And then I'm going to get into some of the data and event processing stuff later, but I did just want to show you the breadth of components, the breadth of options that exist with Unqork. Okay, so now that we're in here, let's just show you the first name. Let's show you a little bit more about these components. We have our first name component, right? This is our text field component. It's one of the most common ones, as you probably would imagine, right? But look at all of it that you get with that you do not have to worry about writing any code to achieve. Things like tooltips, such as what I'm looking at right here, tooltip within the tooltip. Okay, placeholder text. The ability to easily make it read-only, the ability to easily hide it, which I'll show you later that you can then make it appear. Whether or not you want to save it, the ability to kind of work on your data model on the fly, or easily toggle fields on and off. Required validation. Now this is actually, you think required, when you think about that, it's like, of course required, right? But think of how hard validation is in software development, right? Like I remember back as an engineer here, let me go ahead and let me just check this box, right? And I get a little star here. I'll never forget the days where I was just cross my fingers and hope that if I just put a little star next to my, label for my input, that my end users are going to know they have to fill it out and that of good faith they're going to fill it out. But of course, that's not how it works, right? You have to put the star there to help the person, but then you need to put your client-side validation on, right? But then, of course, someone's going to figure out how to get around your client-side validation. You got to go put your server-side validation on. It's a lot of steps to make sure you're getting the right data in from your users. In Unqork, all of those steps come down to the check of the box, right? Pretty cool stuff. I'm going to turn it off now. Date components, right? I can't think of how many different date libraries I've used, date pickers I've used, and all of that good jazz, picking the right one, how it's going to play with all the other JavaScript libraries that I already have that I'm, pulling into my package. Again, you got that right here, right? You can do other things on top of it, in this case, we're going to be collecting a debut date of a player. So typically that's going to be in the past, right? So I can easily just say I want to restrict it to the past here. Again, a lot of really important validation that's one click away from you in Unqork. Okay. Down here, we're going to do a drop down. We're going to select a team. What team the person plays for. Okay. Now, there's 32, 30. I don't even know anymore how many MLB teams there are, but that's the point, right? There's an ever-changing number of teams. They move to different cities, all that good jazz. You don't want to maintain that. Why don't you pull it right from the source? All right. So in the drop down, I'm going to show you when I fill out this workflow, we're actually going to be pulling in the information from the MLB about what teams are out there. And I'm going to be grabbing the abbreviation as the value. I'm going to be grabbing the name of it in the dropdown. So being able to pull very simply from APIs, dynamic values that your users can choose from. No code to do that, right? And then lastly, a radio button. A lot simpler, but effectively another view where I can pick and choose what kind of options and what kind of values I want to store. Cool. So why don't we run through this really quickly? All right. So I'll come up here and I'll say my name is Nick and my name is Gamble, and I'll choose what day I debuted. So let's say I debuted 10 years ago on today. Today's the 27th. Okay. We're going to choose a team. Like I said, this is being pulled directly from an MLB API. Now you may have noticed or not, I don't know, there's a curly W on my shirt here for the Washington Nationals. So as a Washington Nationals fan, I'm going to pretend that I play for the Washington Nationals, or at least did. All right, and I'll call myself a hitter. Why not? All right, I'm going to come through. Now I'm on my second page, right? I'm on a page that's asking me for hitter statistics. Remember, I chose hitter, not pitcher here. Okay, this is showing my hitter statistics. So how did we get to this page? So I'm going to jump back to our workflow again, and that's where this gateway came in. All right, now this gateway says, hey, if I have a position of a pitcher, then I want to take someone to a screen that allows me to enter information about a pitcher. If I say that you're a hitter, I'm going to take you to a screen that says collect some hitter information. So that's where we are now. This gateway showed me a different page based on previous information that I selected, and all I need to do to control that navigation flow is drop in a little gateway and do a very simple logic such as that, right? So now here we are on my hitter information page. So we're going to collect some information to do some calculations about what a hitter would be in baseball. All right, so I'm going to say, let's say I had 100 at-bats, and just for argument's sake, let's say I got 50 hits. Okay, this is highly unlikely that I would ever get 50 hits out of 100 at-bats. Even if my 6-year-old niece or nephew were throwing the ball to me, I'm still not going to get 50 out of 100 hits. But for the sake of argument, for the sake of this demo, let's pretend that I'm actually pretty darn good, and let's choose 50. What's that going to do? It's going to take me to the last page, which is a summary page. Okay, and it's going to show me all the information that we captured before. My name, my debut date, again, the abbreviation of the team I play for, the position, my at-bats, hits, and then my average, which is a calculation based on the hits and my at-bats, and this nice little pretty image that tells me I'm an all-star. Again, completely not true. I would never get 50 hits out of 100. My eyesight is horrific. I'm no Ted Williams, but this is a demo, and I'm the star of the show, so I'm going to pretend that I'm actually pretty darn good at baseball. I'm not. Okay, way better at no code. So how do we get here, right? How do we get to this summary page, and how do we calculate these at-bats? So let's jump back to our workflow again. Okay, now as I said, we took this logical gateway that said, if you're a hitter, show me some hitter stats, which then took me down to this API called Hitter All-Star API. So why don't we open that up? Okay, and now you see an API module in Unqork, and this is where we're going to get into more of those data and event processing components that I kind of paused on when we were looking at our screen, our UI module earlier. All right, so this is an API that takes in an at-bat and a request, a number of at-bats and a number of hits, and it's going to do some calculations to determine what my batting average is and whether or not I'm an all-star. Okay, so the first thing this module does is it's going to kick off, it's going to use an initializer to kick off a calculator. So an initializer in Unqork is basically a sequencer, right? So it might be an init or an onload when you think about programming, like what happens on load, or the initializer of some function. That's how it's going to kick off everything that's going to happen next. In this case, we're going to kick off the calculation of all-star. I'm going to dig into the all-star calculation, and you're going to see here that's going to take in at-bats, and it's going to take in hits, and it's going to output an average. Now think about this like a function, right? A function has arguments in code. Some of those arguments could be required, some of them can be optional requirements. But one way or another, you give inputs, you give arguments in, and it gives you something out. Now, in this case, I'm calculating my batting average by saying taking my number of hits divided by a number of bats and then rounding it to 3 decimal places, because it's always going to be under 1, unless of course you are batting 1,000, as they say, and that's how I get my batting average, right? So that's our calculator. Now we expose the world of Excel functions, which are formulas, which are very familiar to a lot of people, particularly in the enterprise world, building a lot of software there and running a lot of their business processes and maintaining a lot of their business logic. Great. So from there, we're going to go down, and then we're going to get into a rule. We're going to basically make some decision based off of the batting average that I put in. So if I pull up this rule now, what it basically says, this is like, think of a rule. A rule can be an if-else. It can be a switch statement, and analogies back to code. But it's basically saying the same thing. Given an input, I can define the various different scenarios that I want to take or that I want to follow based off of that input. So in this case, I'm expecting the batting average as my input, and I'm going to look at some ranges of my batting average. And as a result, based on the range where my average falls within the ranges that I define, I'm going to output a value of all-star. So I'm going to say if my average is anywhere from 0 to 0.299, then I'm not an all-star, right? So I'm batting under 300, so I'm not an all-star. And if I'm batting over 300, then I am an all-star. Now, with with the way baseball is moving today, there are a whole heck of a lot of all-stars batting under 300. That is not how the game's played anymore. But as an old school person, as many baseball fans are, that still has to be the barometer. Come on, let's stop all this sabermetrics nonsense. Let's get back to playing some baseball, right? Cool. So in the end, that was our calculation, which led me to my summary page, which gave me the results of that. And let me just quickly pull up the summary page for you, which is should be over here. Well, I'll grab it from over here. And that was the player summary. Now this over here was a list of all the modules in the application. I'll dig into some more of them later. But what I wanted to show was the summary page here to show some more interesting things, right? So we collected from that first page, we collected a property called first name, okay? And now on our summary page, we're displaying a property called first name. Unqork does those kinds of mappings for you based around your data model, so that on my summary page, when I reference first name, it's automatically going to populate it with the value of first name in the workflow that I've been in. Okay, and in fact, I can just flip this box and say read only, and now I've got a read only view of the same data that I captured earlier. Okay, we also have some other decisioning logic on this page. Aside from including a lot of read only data, we want to conditionally show some stuff, right? So based on whether or not I said I was a hitter or a pitcher, I want to show different data. So this is a decision here, which says depending on what position, the position that you took, I want to show and hide different sections. Now, this is another way that you can do what I showed in that workflow, right? Now, in the workflow, I can take people down different paths based on data that I collect. I can also show different parts of the screen, very simply based on data that I can collect. Right? Similarly, down here, whether if I'm an all-star, I want to show this image, which is really pretty straightforward, right? It's an image tag, with some attributes, and I'm going to conditionally show that based on whether or not I was an all-star. Okay, now let's run through that again, and let's do it as if I was a pitcher this time. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my workflow, and let's go through it again. So this time around, I'm going to be a pitcher, but actually, you know what? I don't really like this. My pitching coach called me and he said, "Hey, your screen, it's messy. Why are these fields so long? Right? I don't like that. Let's change it up." Okay, so as I said, it's responsive, so it's gonna shrink and grow very nicely, but sometimes some widescreens you don't want that. So let's just make a couple little tweaks before we go through in the picture, and let's just reorganize this a little bit, right? So, as I said, Unqork gives you all the responsive layout components you need to build extremely nice user interfaces. So I'm just going to grab a little column component. I'm going to organize, flip these things around. I'm going to save. Now when I come back to this and I redo it, cool. I got a much nicer looking thing. And again, it's still going to respond and it's still going to, collapse the way I want. Okay, so I'm going to keep it down. Let's keep it down at this size while I fill this out this time. So I'm going to be a pitcher this time around, and if you can tell by my background, I am dialing in from Colorado here. Now I'm normally East Coast based, but one of, if not the only good things that have come out of the last 2 years and COVID and all that has been the work from anywhere movement. So I am currently in the mountains of Colorado. I promise you I'm in my apartment, though I'm not in the lodge at the ski resort, even though it is snowing today, and that looks pretty enticing. So I'm pretty close to Breckenridge, so let's just pretend somebody's name here. This pitcher's name is Breckenridge, which honestly, there's some crazy baby names coming out today, and Breck actually sounds like a pretty cool first name. So let's just go with it. Very valid. Let's just say I debuted yesterday, a brand new rookie, which won't really make sense for my next screen, but we're going to go with it. And I play for the Colorado Rockies, right? And I'm going to be a pitcher. Cool. So let's jump over. Now it's going to ask me for my innings pitched and my earned runs. Now I said I debuted yesterday, so the best I could have pitched was 1 day. So let's say I pitched 9 innings. And, I don't know if you know anything about Colorado, but it is not a very good place for pitchers. And, if we're talking about calculating whether or not you're an all-star, I don't know if there's ever been an all-star pitcher in Colorado. So we're just going to say he's let up 18 runs in those 9 innings. Of course, it's because of the altitude, maybe, even though I'm only, like I was joking before, I couldn't hit a 6-year-old, I might be able to hit a 6-year-old in Colorado. I don't actually not like actually hit a 6-year-old. That doesn't sound good, but like hit a ball that a 6-year-old. Yeah, that's really what I want to say. Cool. And there we go. Now you can see my ERA is a whopping 18, and there's no way in heck I'm an all-star, right? Went through that same concept, that decisioning, calculated my ERA, which is another formula similar to what I showed earlier for the batting average. Okay. So now that I've kind of walked you through a couple different scenarios, showed you both of those gateways, showed you some of the, how that logic is going to not only go through the gateway, but also control different UI screens, some of the calculations that you can run inside of Unqork. I want to show a little bit more in terms of the different ways that you can interface with this data, right? Or interface with this workflow and interface with this logic. So I'm doing this all in the browser, right? But as I said, there's that automated lane at the bottom of a workflow, right? Which allows you to process things completely via API. Same thing for these hitter all-star stats and the pitcher all-star stats. These are APIs that, while serve a purpose in my workflow, are also reusable pieces of logic and reusable calculations that I could use kind of anywhere. So first and foremost, everything that I was just doing, all that data I was capturing, is now available very simply via API. All right, there's my first walkthrough of the workflow where I was a hitter. And now here's my second walkthrough of the workflow when I was a pitcher. All right, simply available via API right out of the box. Okay. Now talking about now let's show another thing, right? So I said these things can also be executed as APIs. So I built this little test harness module called API test. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to test the pitcher workflow as an API. So if I drill into this module a little bit further, I'm going to open up this plugin. Okay, here's a button component. Pretty straightforward, right? You got to put buttons on a page to do different things. When I click this button, this plugin is going to trigger. Now, what's a plugin? A plugin is Unqork's visual API builder, right? Or at least visual calling of an API, right? So in this case, I'm choosing from one of the many internal APIs that you get out of the box with Unqork, which is the ability to create a workflow automatically, right? So I'm going to actually create a workflow via API. I'm going to pass it all the information that it expects. Okay, so I'm going to choose, I put Brecky in here, so it's a little bit different than Breck. I think I've got a different start date today, and then I've got some different data, right? So now when I come back and I press this button, it's going to kick off that workflow. I'm going to come back here, refresh my API, and sure enough, there's all the information that I just did. It not only collected the basic information that I sent, which was this stuff here, but it also processed the logic to say whether or not I'm all-star, what my ERA is, all via API. So that same logic that you're using in the front end, immediately available to you as API as well, as you look for more ways that you want people to interface with the applications that you're building, right? Second part of this API test is just testing one of those individual pieces, right? So just testing the hitter API, which says, hey, Okay, I'm going to execute a module. I want to execute this hitter all-star. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it the information it wants, which is the number of at-bats and the number of hits. And that's going to give me back my information, right? So if I come down here and I hit hitter API, sure enough, I get back my batting average and whether or not I'm an all-star based off the payload I sent with the at-bats and the hits. Now, how did I know how to do that? Well, how I know to do that is by documentation, right? Everyone loves API documentation. No one loves to manage API documentation. No one loves to manage documentation, period, right? That's why Unqork is going to auto-generate documentation for you. Okay, so here is an auto-generated documentation of the hitter. I'm sorry, this is a pitcher. Let me jump over. Boom, there's my hitter. So Unqork is going to automatically generate the documentation for my hitter API, and it's going to tell me that you got to send me an app. As a result, I'm going to send you back your average and whether or not you're okay. Auto-generated. I make a change. I add a new request parameter. This gets updated. Think of it, like Swagger out of the box. Okay. Now I showed you executing an API via the browser just through this basic call. But check this out too. One of my favorite features of Unqork is our server-side debugger. Right? Debugging. We all like to, we'd like to think that we never write any bad code or never config any bad config or no code any bad no code, but problems are going to happen and we're going to have to fight through them. And that's where some of Unqork's debugging capabilities come in, right? So let's say that this API, what did I say? This API asks me for at-bats and hits. So I'm going to add in at-bats and I'm going to say I took 100 at-bats. I'm going to add in hits and let's say I got 35 hits and I'm going to execute and sure enough, I get down that data, right? Okay, actually, let me do the hitter one. Let me do the pitcher one for you because we showed you enough of the hitter. Let's have a little more fun and let's do the pitcher. In this case, let's give it a hot second to start up. There we go. So innings, let's say I did 100 innings, and runs, let's say I let up 20 runs in those 100 innings. And there we go. My ERA is 1.8 and I'm an all-star. All right, I clearly don't pitch in Colorado. Now that's great. It shows me the response. Wonderful. But what you also get is this nice little debugger tab. Okay, what this debugger tab is going to do is it's going to allow you to step through the execution of your module piece by piece, right? So what did I show you earlier? The first thing that happened was an initializer was triggered a calculator. So you're going to see that was that first step. When I move to the next step, you're going to see that the calculator was executed and it set the ERA from null to 1.8, which now you can see that as a change to my data object, to my data response over here. Now I had this decision, which is waiting for the value of the ERA. So you're going to see a few points where it's waiting, and then it's going to get that value. And now it's going to say, okay, well, based on the ERA, the all-star is yes. And you're going to see only that change over here. So you're going to get the total data, the entire data of your API's execution over here, and each individual data change along the way. You're probably used to putting breakpoints in your code to check data at any given point. I mean, that's like debugging 101. Put a breakpoint, see what the data says, and go from there. Unqork's going to give it to you in a step-by-step manner along the way. So I could keep going and going about Unqork in general, but it's the bottom of the ninth, and we're not going to extras today. So I just want to say thanks for attending. I hope this was a pretty good overview of Unqork, 101. And like I said, stay tuned later on for a lot more exciting and complex, subjects and maybe even some new faces to replace mine on the screen. So thanks again, and have a good one.